Thank you so much for all of you to join us with this media briefing. Am I audible with my mask on? Am I audible? I prefer having my mask on. I'm audible. Thank you. As Thabo has said, today we are doing a weekly media briefing from the Gauteng Provincial Command Council. We will start with the PPE procurement investigations, deal with that first, and then come back to do a comprehensive briefing around what the trend this week is around coronavirus in our province. I am joined, therefore, by the MEC for Treasury and our senior Treasury officials, specifically to ensure that we're able to deal with the issue in the public space that has to do with procurement of PPE. And I must say, something that has greatly embarrassed the Gauteng Provincial Government. And I will share with the public today about what has happened with regard to this matter and what the way forward is. So let's go to that, and then we will come back to do a comprehensive health response to map out what the trend is in our province. So I want to go to the slide that deals with PPE. So the first thing I would like to say is to the people of our province, that as the Premier of Gauteng, I've been Premier of Gauteng since 2014. At the onset of my first term of office as the Premier of Gauteng, of a government, provincial government led by the ANC, clean governance became one of the hallmarks of our administration, both the 5th administration as well as the 6th administration. And this was as a result of the mandate of the ANC that we must deal with corruption and cultivate ethical leadership and look after the finances, the public finances in our province, and ensure that these resources are deployed for the purpose of improving the quality of life of the people of Gauteng. As a result of that mandate, we introduced, during the 5th administration, precisely in 2015, we introduced the open tender system. Many of you know that the open tender system is something that we championed in Gauteng province. We introduced that to ensure that there's greater transparency in the awarding of tenders, because all over the world, procurement, the area of procurement is vulnerable and open to corrupt practices all over the world. We introduced this open tender system in order to open up the awarding of tenders to greater transparency, to ensure greater accountability. And as a result of the introduction of the open tender system in Gauteng province, we also saw a significant increase in the number of clean audits in Gauteng province. So if you look at the period from 2014 up to now, and if you look at the auditors' reports, the AG's reports, the Auditor General's reports, there was a substantial improvements in audit outcomes in Gauteng province in that period. quite significant improvement. And every time the Auditor General spoke about audit outcomes, our province was always amongst those that were showing great efforts. So this was part of a consistent effort to send a message to the people out there, the public, members of the public whose money is what we use to do the work we are supposed to do in order to improve the public, the quality of life of members of the public. We have always sent out a message there that we are doing our best to ensure that there's greater transparency in the way procurement decisions are made, there's accountability, and this was shown in the improvements in the audit outcomes. As part of this whole effort, clean governance, ethical leadership, improving public financial management, in addition to the open tender system, we also introduced the Gauteng Ethics and Anti-Corruption Advisory Council, which is civil society-led. So I appointed a group of civil society leaders who are very active in the area of fighting corruption, in the NGO movement, in civil society movements, in the trade unions, who are part of the Anti-Corruption Advisory Council in our province. That Anti-Corruption Advisory Council is still in place even as we speak now in the 6th administration. In addition to that, in 2017 we signed an MOU, a secondment agreement with the Special Investigation Unit. The Special Investigation Unit, as you all know, get its mandate from the President through proclamations. But we asked the Special Investigation Unit that outside proclamations, please work close with us. Second, people, there are specific departments where we have always said there were problems. Health has always been one of them, including on issues of medico-legal claims, the investigation into life, Esidimeni. So the Special Investigation Unit has been working with the Gauteng Provincial Government on various investigations in various departments. Some of them lead to proclamations. Some they start with an investigation and then we ask the President for a proclamation. But we did that as part of ensuring that we have a group. So the Advisory Council, Civil Society Advisory Council, is a watchdog. The Special Investigation Unit in our province is not only called once, but it is the MOU enables us from time to time, if there is a whistleblower in a particular department, the matter gets referred there. And they are able to say to us, just by looking at it, we need to ask for a proclamation from the President. So the open tender system was also a very important measure to safeguard us. It helped us a great deal. In the period of 6 years, we have had, yes, incidents, cases of corruption in this department, in that department, but we haven't had at a grand scale of the allegations we are facing with PPE now. And I want to explain the reason is because the open tender system was a proactive measure to ensure that anyone who gets a tender, who gets a job to do in the Gauteng Provincial Government has to appear in a platform where others would also be there to watch. Why did so and so get that tender and not me? And as a result, in the past 5 years, we haven't had many cases where tender decisions are challenged by one company over the other in our province. It is as a result of the success of the open tender system. Now, come March this year, when we entered a national disaster, which was declared by National Cabinet and announced by the President, we know when we got there, the national disaster occasioned that said things needed to be done in a particular way. And amongst those issues, there are several memoranda or circulars issued by National Treasury that have to do with emergency procurement to guide everybody, to guide all provinces, to guide municipalities. So I know for a fact that emergency procurement can always be abused as a reason to be corrupt, to award tenders to those who don't qualify for an inch to be able to get that job. So the open tender system, which would have applied in any circumstance, in any period, would have not applied under this, but the emergency procurement regulations that National Treasury issues and issued through circulars were adequate. Those emergency procurement circulars were adequate to also ensure that we can prevent any abuse of the procurement system for malfeasance to appoint companies that don't deserve or have no capacity to do the work that they were appointed. So one of the important things to add is that there was one of the National Treasury circulars issued was about centralization of procurement of PPE into specific departments, and in this particular case, in the Department of Health. So one of the things you need to understand, I want the people of our province to understand, that when we entered this period, so the Department of Health was responsible for procuring PPE through using that circular, which was the MEC can speak, the MEC for Finance can speak about those specific circulars. The first circular, is it Circular 3?
Circular, because the National Treasury gave us the Instruction Note 8 of 1990-20 financial year.
So the centralization, it is important to understand that the centralization of procurement, all the departments in our province for PPE, and the reason was very, very simple, and it was a very good reason. But I want to say that that's the thing. So people, sometimes things that are introduced for good cause can be abused. Firstly, to ensure that the standard of PPE must be acceptable, because many departments outside the Department of Health who didn't know, because it's not their daily work. Education is one of the examples. It's not their daily work to know what is appropriate PPE. So the centralization was to get the Department of Health in our province and in provinces, let me go as far as that, to help all the departments to get PPE of an appropriate standard and quality, but also pricing issues to make sure that there's not going to be overcharging, because this is a department that deals with PPE all the time outside the pandemic. The Department of Health deals with PPE. So that was to ensure that there is a proper approach, but there's also maximization to ensure that we get value for money out of this process. A good decision on centralization. In our case, I'm saying that was also, it became an opportunity for abuse, and I'll indicate how this got abused. So there were several instructions from National Treasury transmitted to our Provincial Treasury, and our Provincial Treasury transmitting those instructions to the relevant departments and working with the Department of Health. So I want to say, given our track record in improving audit outcomes, in improving transparency, in improving accountability in this province, as shown by the reports of the Auditor General, indisputably that Gauteng Province had improved its audit outcomes, these allegations we are facing now have profoundly eroded public confidence in the government I have the honor to lead. There is no doubt the scale of these allegations have profoundly eroded public confidence in the work of the collective that I have the honor to lead in this province. But also these allegations have profoundly undermined the work, tremendous work done by various sectors, our healthcare workers across the province in the fight against COVID-19, and many sectors that have been mobilized in this fight against COVID-19. So this work, there is no doubt in my mind that these allegations have profoundly impacted on this work. And that's why we decided that today we will first start, before we do a normal briefing on our work on COVID-19, we must first give a report on this matter of PPE procurement. So exactly what happened? So one of the measures we put in place at the very beginning, I did a media briefing on the 5th of June. Remember, if you look at our media briefing on the 5th of June, I did in that media briefing say that the Gauteng Audit Services, which is called GAS, the Gauteng Audit Services is also working very closely with the Department of Health in monitoring all the procurements that are happening there. So the Gauteng Audit Services had been given a mandate at the request of the MEC and the HOD. So Dr. Masuku and Professor Lukele requested that we should bring the Gauteng Audit Services as one of those things the audit services must do. In April, they did this request through, the MEC did that through the letter from the HOD in April, to be precise, the 17th of April. That letter came to our Treasury. Gauteng Audit Services falls under Treasury. For Gauteng Audit Services to start doing an audit of PPE procurement. And at that point when the request was made, it was also clear that we are going to go into huge amounts of procurement, huge amounts of money. The audit services did an audit, and this is what auditors do. They were doing an audit, they were not doing a forensic investigation, and they identified, the Gauteng Audit Services did an internal audit, and out of that came back to the Department of Health and to myself to say that they have identified areas of lack of compliance in the procurement of PPE, but they feel that the most appropriate way to act, they are auditors, the most appropriate thing is to appoint a forensic investigation, and in this particular case, the Special Investigation Unit, so that the Special Investigation Unit can go back, including look at those specific allegations or areas of lack of compliance with the regulations. So the audit services came back to me in May, to the MEC for Health in May, and me and the MEC for Health and myself agreed that we must indeed do what the Gauteng Audit Services is requesting. At that time, they had looked only at a few procurement areas, and then in May, to be precise, from the 25th of May, the Special Investigation Unit was given the mandate. The Gauteng head of the Premier's office administratively is the DG of the province, at my request, after signing appropriate documents, met with the Special Investigation Unit from the 25th of May. After all this process and the request was made to me and MEC Masuku to now do a forensic investigation. And that forensic investigation started at the end of May. One of the important things to identify is that amongst other things identified by the audit services there was that purchase orders were just being issued to various companies. Now, what you have seen in the media, those amounts issued to different companies is purchase orders. It's not the money paid to the companies. So the audit services said to us in May, this issue of issuing purchase orders, and the audit services also said they were concerned about how just that work was being conducted. In the way in which service providers were being interacted with, it was not in accordance with the emergency regulations. Immediately after initiating this process, we know the CFO of the Department of Health resigned. I want to make it public because on the 5th of June at this media briefing, I did say, we have not just the audit services, that the Special Investigation Unit is already investigating PPE. On the 5th of June is before there were these allegations in the media. I did say it here. And I made, those of you who attend our media briefings, I made it clear, whether if an official is found to have been involved in corruption, whether they have resigned or not is not the issue. They must be found. I was not at the time making a conclusive statement, but I was saying it doesn't matter whether someone is still in the department or not, but if anyone resigns when the Special Investigation Unit is doing their work, they will be found in this country and there shall be consequences. What is the update so far? Since the Special Investigation Unit started doing its work on the basis of our memorandum of agreement of secondment, but simultaneously a request was made to the President by myself. Again, we do that with the advice of the Special Investigation Unit. So they started work on the 25th of May, and simultaneously we put a request to the President for a proclamation. And that request, I particularly put it at the beginning of June for a proclamation for the Special Investigation Unit now to have all the powers that they may not have under our MOU, because this is a very serious tender. So as just an update to you is to say that initially there were 91 companies that were being looked at, and these are not companies that have been given purchase orders to deliver PPE, and some of them have delivered some PPE. Some of them, the quality of the PPE may be an issue. Some of those companies were also not paid on the basis of failure to deliver or the quality of the PPE. But our Treasury, our Gauteng Treasury also went further to say to the Department of Health, you should not pay now that we are doing this investigation. At that point, there was up to R1 billion of PPE that had been ordered, and our Gauteng Treasury advised the Department of Health that don't pay these companies given where we are now. So I can tell you, at the advice of our Treasury, an amount of R1 billion which could have been paid to companies. Yes, some amounts were paid to those companies prior to where we came to, prior to appointing the Special Investigation Unit. But through this intervention by our Treasury, an amount of R1 billion which could have been paid to companies, that was stopped. And subsequently, many of those contracts were being cancelled, and I can say HOD was advised by our Treasury HOD to cancel those contracts. Many of them have been cancelled, others are still being cancelled, but this is a process that started just on the basis of the credibility of the information they were presenting and their inability to deliver the quality that was required. If you ask me which ones, I can't say to you now, But out of these 91 companies, the full number of companies now that are being looked at by the Special Investigation Unit is 102 companies. In other words, it's all. And we are not suggesting that all the 102 companies are not proper businesses. We are not suggesting that all the 102 companies were appointed inappropriately. We are not suggesting that all of them did not deliver proper PPE. But they must all be looked at. And that's what I want to say, to explain that because the audit was able to identify on a preliminary basis that there was something that was not going right, everybody who came into the party must be properly investigated. And that's what the Special Investigation Unit is doing now. So all PPE contracts of whatever amounts, paid or not paid, including those that are cancelled, because the cancellation also invites question marks that need to be looked at. All that is being looked at by the Special Investigation Unit. I have given the Special Investigation Unit, just based on secondments, I've given them to complete this work as quickly as possible because they have been able to speed up some of the investigations that we have asked them to do. And I can say that there was a period where the SIU used to take very long, but in the province in the last few years, they've been able to implement investigations. We have several investigations. We will be briefing the public department by department. Not today. Today, I just want to focus on the health PPE. They've completed that. There are disciplinary processes on some of these departmental investigations. There are also criminal cases being pursued on some of those investigations that the Special Investigation Unit has done. We're convinced that as soon as they finish this investigation, we will deal with the crux of the matter. That PPE is very, very important for our frontline workers. It's meant to protect them. It's meant to empower them to be able to do their work. It was not meant for the loot. It was not meant as an opportunity to open up that as a front for looting. And as I emphasize, that it doesn't mean every company whose name is there got this work through malfeasance. It doesn't mean they did not deliver. It doesn't mean they overcharged. And that's what the Special Investigation Unit is doing now, to help us be able to establish who, but also be able to hold specific people accountable. Because of how serious, now these allegations have damaged also the work that the MEC for Health, as the lead MEC, Dr. Masuku, has been doing. He has been leading our team in the province on this front very well. And I must say that I'm disappointed. At this point, I'm really, really disappointed to have an MEC who has been leading in this front very well, facing allegations that I can't ignore. This cannot be ignored by any serious government, nor can the ANC ignore, and the ANC itself has taken specific decisions. So we know, as a fact, as the Premier of Gauteng, I'm therefore giving MEC Masuku leave of absence. Initially for the next 4 weeks, we're hoping that all these investigations will be completed in this period, so that the full report of the Special Investigation Unit comes to the fore. And these many allegations that have been thrown his way, it is not advisable for him to be bedeviled by those, instead of focusing on the battle in our hands. And the battle in our hands is to save lives. We are now preparing for the peak. The peak is very close now. And I need to say that as you will see when we go into the next briefing, our province has really been working extremely hard. Now on the ground, we also have a lot of civil society organizations that are helping us in the hotspots. You'll see that report, that are helping us to respond. But the PPE story, this PPE procurement malfeasance, I can say malfeasance just based initially on the audit, but the real full story will come out of the forensic investigation. This PPE story has the potential to sidetrack us from the battle of saving lives. And it is shameful, utterly shameful, to have money meant to help save lives being open for general loot in the way that we think when the Special Investigation Unit comes, it will be able to expose those areas. And again, I want to say that in there may be companies that have really done a great job. I want to emphasize that I issued a memo to all departments as the Premier of the province. I issued a memo in addition to those circulars from National Treasury and our Provincial Treasury. I also issued a memo in April to all departments, firstly saying the procurement of PPE is very important. We must ensure that we support local manufacturing. In other words, businesses that have capacity to manufacture locally in our own province, that are proper businesses, must be supported, including supporting those who are going to be manufacturing cloth masks, township enterprises, black businesses, businesses owned by women, as part of the drive to ensure that the production of this PPE is localized, but it is. We also emphasize that this must be done cleanly. There must be no corruption. So that is why this significant allegations around procurement malfeasance undermine everything we have been doing. So I am confident that we will get from the Special Investigation Unit everybody. So in other words, there are many businesses that may have also delivered PPE, but according to our Gauteng audit services, they had been red flagged, and our health department was advised not to pay them. In that 1 billion that was stopped, the payment that was stopped. I don't want to speak about any specific company today, because the cases and issues about any specific company is what the Special Investigation Unit will be able to establish. So thank you very much, and I think that for me brings me to the end of an important issue that we wanted to brief the people of our province on procurement of PPE and allegations of corruption and what we are doing about this. I'm hoping that as we soldier on with the real battle in our hands, and the real battle in our hands is to save more lives, to ensure more people recover like myself, people who get infected. And I'm very grateful for those who sent messages of well wishes, and I'm grateful for those who have recovered. The recoveries in our province have improved tremendously. You will see that report later. We're now up to 62% of recoveries. I'm very grateful, but it is the work also of our health workers. I experienced that myself when I was at home, COVID positive, came face to face with our health workers, our public health workers, to whom this PPE is meant for. I came face to face with their fears. I came face to face with their bravery. I saw what they do in order to save more life. Even with a lot of these recoveries, is interventions truly done by our health workers. These are our heroes. That's why we must protect public resources. That's why every single cent that gets allocated for COVID-19 must be safeguarded. And I must also say to you that We now want everything that has to do with COVID-19. It's not just a PPE. We want to make sure that there will also be investigations of all COVID-19 expenditure to just satisfy ourselves, whether it's infrastructure or it's food, to satisfy ourselves in our province. We have fed 2 million people since March. But we want to satisfy ourselves also that even with that, the procurement of the food was done properly. I don't want to wait until there is a whistleblower who comes and say something didn't go well in this process. We work very closely through this secondment. So I just want to check if there are questions. You bear with me. The team from the advisory committee, bear with us. We just want to entertain questions on this. First, Thabo, please come back. This is your job. And then we will go back to present the progress on the health response. But this matter is serious, and that's why I just want to deal with questions only related to it. Okay, let me, for completeness, so that you don't ask me a question, there will be an acting MEC for health. So before you ask me who, let me, for completeness, I have appointed MEC Jacob Mamabulo, who is the MEC currently of transport, public transport infrastructure, to be the acting MEC for health. He will do his work in transport, and in the next 4 weeks at least, when we are doing all this work, this investigation, MEC Jacob Mamabulo will be the acting MEC also for the Department of Health. In addition to appointing MEC Mamabulo, I am also going to ask the Minister of Health. I have been talking to the Minister of Health on a daily basis. He himself has been phoning to ask me when I was COVID positive how I am. But I also want him to also add a technical team to our department. So HOD Lukele, Prof. Lukele, the Minister of Health has been requested by me to also send an additional team, because I don't want us to go into the peak with any shaky grounds as the Gauteng province. So thank you very much. We can take questions on this one. Thabo, just make sure we can do that as quickly as possible so we can complete our briefing.
Yes.
The COVID update is very important.
Okay. Thank you, Premier. We will now take questions. Yeah, the mic will move around. Just introduce yourself and then ask your question, and then I'll also check a few that we received on WhatsApp. Okay, please go ahead.
It's Zanda Ngobo from Newsroom Africa. While the Premier has said that he doesn't want to speak about any particular company, we just need clarity for the sake of the efficiency of the province in terms of PPE, whether or not King Digo did actually, in fact, deliver on the PPE. Maybe you won't be able to clarify on whether payment was made, but did he, in fact, actually deliver that PPE? And then just a clarity-seeking question. How was the track record of the companies measured, in terms of these 91 companies? What criteria were you using? Because another issue that has been raised was that Digo's company doesn't actually have a particular track record for the kind of services that they were, tendering to provide. Thank you.
But you just started by saying the Premier said he doesn't want to go into the specific companies, and yet you want him to do exactly that. And also bear in mind that there's an investigation now by the SIU to help us answer some of those questions. I'm just saying that, but of course, the Premier will decide how to deal with that. Let's move to the next one.
Thank you. It's Govan Whittles from ENCA. Premier, you said that some companies have delivered and you put a stop to those payments after they were red flagged. What's going to happen to that PPE that's currently in the custodianship of the Gauteng government? Will you give it back, or are you still contemplating after the SIU investigation whether you will pay those companies? And then secondly, Premier, I just wanted to check regarding the initial audit which was done of PPE procurement, which was then upgraded to a forensic investigation and SIU investigation, whether you're able to share any of the outcomes of that audit, and more specifically, are you not able to tell Gauteng citizens at this point who has been implicated in alleged procurement malfeasance, as you have said? I'm asking specifically if the former CFO of the Department of Health has been implicated at all from that audit report. And then just a timeline, Premier, on the SIU investigation. When are you expecting them to complete that? Thank you.
Okay. That's fine, we'll come to you.
Good afternoon. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we still have one beside Priscilla.
It's Ndaezo from Power FM. Premier, having an MEC of Health placed on special leave at this particular moment, do you not feel concerned that this may destabilize the program that the provincial government has as far as fighting COVID-19 is concerned, going into the peak in about a week or two from now? And how confident are you that the interim leadership that may be put while this process is happening will be able to do the same amount of work that the MEC did while fighting COVID-19? Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Good afternoon. It's Griselda Lewis from SABC Television News. Premier, you mentioned two figures. First, you said there were 90 companies that were under
91,
investigation.
yes.
91. And then you said currently there are 102 companies that are under investigation. Is that the total amount of companies currently pertaining to personal protective equipment? And also you mentioned that investigations would also include officials within these departments, because obviously in order for these some of these issues to go through the cracks, these companies would need to work with people inside these departments. Are there any officials, or how many officials are under investigation, whether it's within the Department of Health and also within the Department of Finance, for example, just officials within your particular provincial departments that are under investigation currently? Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Makhura.
All right. Yeah, sure.
Thank you, sir. Sorry, I had not asked this, but it's a question relating to the processes at the Department of Health. The SIU confirming that they're looking at 2.2 billion rands worth of procurement that is being investigated. And from the initial reports, Premier, it appears as if the procurement of PPE in the Gauteng Department of Health, that entire process has been politically corrupted, because we're seeing politicians that are benefiting allegedly from this PPE procurement. What's your concept, your comment on the corruption of that process by what appears to be politicians?
Yeah, you keep stretching. You really want us to get to the conclusion. Let me remind you, there's an ongoing investigation by the SIU, and we all want to see the outcome of that investigation, because it will answer many of the questions that we have, which you also have. But I will just read two questions quickly that we have on WhatsApp before the Premier and the MEC answer your questions. One is from Baldwin Dava from Independent Media, and he says, may the Premier explain why tender procedures were not followed in the allocation of tenders, or rather, I suppose it's meant to be in the allocation of contracts. Is the son of the President Cyril Ramaphosa a recipient of one of the tenders? If so, what criteria was used? Is the MEC Bandile Masuku, or if the MEC Bandile Masuku is placed on leave, what about the Chief of Staff in his office? Then The next question is from Alex Mitchley from News 24. It's a 3 set of questions. 1, how many of these contracts were awarded to politically connected individuals? 2, how much money has been lost through these dodgy deals? 3, what has been the cost per item of PPE? What was the average cost per mask? Those are the questions, and I will now invite the Premier and the MEC to answer. Let me just see if I have not missed one more question before the MEC and the Premier answer. Okay, yeah, one last one from Tsidi Madia from News 24. The Premier said a team from National would be coming in to assist Gauteng. Did he request this, or did the National Department decide it's time to intervene? If he requested it, when did he ask for help? Okay, I think we are ready to answer, Premier. But as I did explain, many of the questions that you are asking will be answered by the investigation that is ongoing. But the Premier and the MEC will give you the answers.
Thank you very much. Let me start with Tsidi Madia's question. In June, I stood in this room at the beginning of June when I said the storm has arrived. You might remember that. When I said the storm has arrived, I also said in Gauteng we want to get support from national government with an additional technical team now in advance. I said that in June. We subsequently met, myself and MEC Dr. Masuku met with the Minister of Health, Dr. Zweli Mkhize. We actually met after the handing over of some equipment, the ventilators at Krisani Baragwanath. We had a meeting with the minister. We discussed extensive issues. And by that time, so it was before this PPE story, it was clear to Dr. Masuku and I that we're going to need in advance support like the minister has been doing. When the Western Cape was going through that surge, the minister sent a team there. The Eastern Cape, when the Eastern Cape was going through a surge, the minister sent a team. We said we are already seeing the signs of the surge in Gauteng. We don't want to wait. We are asking for that. So that discussion already took place, Sidi, in June. And the minister sent a technical team. I can confirm there's a technical team working with our Department of Health and Infrastructure on field hospitals that has been sent by health. But I want more than a technical team now. I also want additionally, in addition to the technical team, based on that discussion we had with Minister Zweli Mkhize in June, additional support from national. And it's not that we don't have capacity, but it is always better to have more support. Gauteng is the epicenter of COVID-19, and we had gone through significant surge in June, and the next presentations are going to show what is happening. Sidi, that's my response. The discussion with the minister took place in June. He has delivered on the technical side of that. I'm going back to him to need additional support because the head of department, Professor Lukele, needs all the support, especially because the acting MEC is not a health specialist. It's not trained in health. Dr. Masuku's advantage was that he's a trained doctor. He has been in practice. He understands the Gauteng health system very, very well. To complement the technical work and the administrative work. That is why I'm going back to Minister Mkhize for additional support based on the discussions we had with him. There was a question about how much money was lost, how much the cost per item. I want to leave those issues. You can't determine how much money was lost because the investigation is helping. That's the reason we have all the 102 companies. So it's the 102 companies, it's all the companies that got work on PPE, basically. If the number increases, any other company that's going to get work on PPE will be included in the investigation. We want to be sure that any of these companies got work. We can't say we have lost. So there are companies that were paid for delivery. The investigation will establish if there are companies that were paid when they have not delivered. The investigation will establish if there are companies that were overcharged. And just from the look of things, some of that information that is out there in public about what a mask is supposed to cost and then how much the department paid, all that work is being done. You may find that there may be a company that got the job properly, but it overcharged. It's still a crime. So there may be a company that is a proper operating business that even manufactures. But you may find that they violated one of the regulations. They'll still be held accountable. Are there officials being investigated? I must tell you that my focus as the head of government, I know the companies, the SIU will deal with that, is the officials in the Department of Health. We have had a bad track record of this department. Allegations of corruption at each given moment. So we are digging deep. There will be officials that will be held accountable. The preliminary audit pointed to where the direction is. And it's not about whether I want to take the people of our province into confidence. I'm not hiding information. When you deal with legal processes of holding officials accountable, I don't want to make an announcement. So if I get asked a question, so what do you want? Is the CFO one of those that did wrong things? I will not answer that question because there are processes. There are current processes that are going on that have to do also, these are legal processes that I don't want to also send a message to everybody there who we are supposed to catch what exactly we are doing. I can't reveal everything. Yes, we are looking at our own officials, definitely. These companies would have not gotten the work if the rot is not in government. If they wouldn't have gotten the work if the rot is not in government. And I talk to government officials all the time, left, right, and center, about why corruption cannot be tolerated. Sometimes people just listen to you speak and then you turn, you leave. That we want to make sure that on this procurement, corruption on PPE, we must send a strong message. People must go to jail. And I'm saying this is something that we've been talking and talking and talking in our country about. The corrupt must go to jail. This is just one moment. Because what is it doing? It destroys all the goodwill amongst the people, amongst ordinary people, amongst healthcare workers who are sacrificing so much. All that goodwill get destroyed by just somebody who think this is a Christmas a present for them. So this is very, very important. I have been talking a lot about dealing with corruption in Gauteng, this investigation, and sometimes we get frustrated. Let me tell you, departmental disciplinary processes of government can also be very frustrating. And that's why we need special measures that the president has put in place, including special courts to deal with the corrupt. Because sometimes you have a departmental disciplinary hearing where an official who has done something wrong comes out there with a slap on the wrist. They've done wrong things, they've gone through several disciplinary processes, they get warnings. And when a disciplinary process has happened and someone who's done wrong things, they just get a warning out of that. You who's the political head or the executive authority, you just get frustrated by that. So that is why I fully support the special measures. This is wartime. The special measures that have been put in place by national government to ensure the corrupt are prosecuted. And in our case, it's not just PPE, it's every other corrupt deal that has happened. Whether you are a politician who has influenced that process, or you are an official, and I must always say, politicians don't sit in tenders. I know what the public say, but they can influence. And that's where we lose the goodwill, that the goodwill gets lost. That even those who may, and in this particular case, my heart is sore that MEC Masuku, who has been doing so well, and Dibu, you are the one asking this question. I'm saying my heart is sore that MEC Masuku, who has been doing such good work in helping us to respond to COVID, faces these allegations. But we can't close our eyes to it. It does raise question marks on political leaders, on government work, and the right thing to do is what in this particular case, that the allegations are there. We want to move on. We want to continue the battle against COVID. He stepped aside through leave of absence. We will continue the fight. This team that you have from the advisory council in the province, the health and COVID advisory council, the health workers on the ground that I have seen, who are doing work, that battle, that struggle must continue. The struggle against COVID must continue. Yes, MEC Mamabulo is not a doctor, I've said that. He will never exactly fit in the same way. But what we need there is to give guidance to the team of experts. We've got lots of capable people in the Department of Health. There may be rogue elements, and that's the rogue elements through this clean-up of the investigation we want to root out. But there are a lot of good people in the institutions, our health institutions. Gauteng has got some of the best brains about the health professionals. They are there. They are in the front line of the battle. So if you ask me, it's a setback as the premier who has so much confidence in the MEC, but it is true, he must clear his name. We can't just sit here and say, no, what he is saying is true. I may believe him, but there must be somebody who can say, hey, you might have not done something, but did other things happen in your name? That's why it's a very important step as a leader. Take a step back. He has taken a step back, but the battle continues. I expect that MEC Mamabulo's experience will come handy to the team of health workers that are there in our province. I wouldn't like to compare the two. They're very different strengths completely. I have answered the question, Griselda, around the 102 is exactly all. If the number will increase, it will be because there are every other company that got the tender will be part of the SIU investigation. And I keep emphasizing, painfully so, that it doesn't mean if you are in that list. So if there's a company that is in that list and they feel really that they did great work, the investigation will say so. Those that did not get paid, they delivered. At the moment, we are busy with an investigation. If somebody says, I've delivered my stuff, I'm coming to fetch it, so be it. But all we know is that there's an investigation now. If you like, this is a scene of crime. This is a crime scene. They just need to chill. They must wait until the investigation is completed. Don't try to say you are coming to fetch because we didn't pay you. You are coming to fetch your stuff. That stuff itself may be a subject of investigation. And that's why there may be question marks. Even if you may have decided, and I don't want to talk about a specific company, I want to refuse to talk about a specific company that has to do with that's out there. I want to refuse. I am the Premier, I'm not a gossiper. I must wait for the process we have put in place, which is a credible investigation to determine what any company would have done. If all that information will come. If there's a company that said to us, we have delivered, but we don't want you to or keep that stock, that will come in the investigation. I don't want to entertain that. I'm dealing with the principle that we face at the moment. And at the moment, I've said in terms of what we have been able to stop is R1 billion payment of companies that would otherwise have been paid. But if we find that in the process somebody else was also paid when they were red flagged, there shall be consequences. Here we are dealing with everything. So the Gauteng audit services, the work that they did, the companies that they red flagged, and let me go back. There's a question about what exactly they identified, that there are companies that have overpriced. That they identified. They identified that there are companies that were not in the central database. This thing about a company being in the central is part of the treasury regulations. That the companies that were not in the central database that have been given these purchase orders, and some of them at the time that they found out may have been paid. And I want to say, every company that was paid, which the investigation will say there was something wrong. The quality, yes. There was also some issues about the quality of PPE that was red flagged by the Gauteng audit services. Say, come in. That's why we could easily, confidently stop that certain companies, these companies must not be paid once they were red flagged. But I want the specific companies, I want that to be subjected to the SIU investigation. The SIU must confirm that what the Gauteng audit services identified is true, but they must also go and say, who are these companies? Who are the directors of these companies? How did they get the job in this particular case? There is a question around, I'd said, I think I've dealt the timeline for the SIU investigation. Look, all I know is that our DG Pindi Lebaleni, has been talking continuously with the head of the SIU to say that the Premier wants this to be completed. Like the other investigations that were completed, which I say there are now disciplinary processes, including the e-tender, the e-gov tender. There's a disciplinary investigation underway on that tender. They completed that. There's a disciplinary there's a disciplinary process underway that has started on that, as there are other disciplinary processes, including aspects of the issue that has been referred to the authorities such as the Hawks. I know also that the Hawks are dealing with that e-gov. Out of the work that the SIU did and submitted a report to me, I gave a go-ahead, yes. Let's do the internal disciplinary process, but is there a criminal proceedings must also go ahead against whoever is responsible in this. Let me conclude by what Baldwin has raised. Okay, now the question about corruption of procurement by politicians. What I would like to say is that our policies as a country are very, very clear. If you run a proper business, all I know is that I'm in politics. I can't run a business, and I can't do business with government. If someone runs a business and you say politicians, because sometimes when you say politicians, I hope you're not referring to people in government. So if it's not people in government, it's people in parties and so on, there's nothing I can do about that. People in I can do something about colleagues who are in government. They cannot be involved in business with government. If they are involved in business that has to do with their professions, they need approval from me. If it's those who are MECs. If it's government officials, they too are not allowed by law. So, but if you're saying politicians in general are corruption, that's just a crime. You deal with it regardless of whether it's a politician or not. Deal with that as a crime. If somebody manipulated the procurement processes because they are in politics and so on, if this is what is not consistent with the procurement system, and the good thing is that our procurement system empowers women. Here in this province, our procurement system empowers township businesses, empowers women-owned businesses, youth-owned businesses, township-owned businesses, on those things that they can do. And those things that they prove they can deliver on. It's not just about being given a job on something you really know nothing about, that you cannot be able to do. That's what we emphasize. We are for empowerment. We are for transformation. And for that, I can apologize. For the transformation is our mandate as the Gauteng administration. But transformation cannot be equated to corruption. Ensuring that black businesses get the job on PPE is the right thing to do. But it must be done through proper procedures. Procedures must be adhered to. Regulations must be adhered to. So Baldwin says, ask a question about why procedures were not followed. Baldwin, the point, your question has to do with what the investigation is. I explained from the beginning that there were emergency procurement regulations, including centralization, which were well-meaning. They could never be used to abuse this process. Those emergency procurement regulations made it possible for us to deviate from our open tender system, which takes long, but which is the best guarantee that everybody who gets the job will get it on the basis that everybody knows there was no crookery or exchange of money anywhere else. But in emergency situations, so those emergency regulations were well-meaning and they can be applied, they can work, they can prevent corruption. So there must be no excuse, basically. There can't be an excuse for corruption under the emergency regulations. Baldwin asked me a question about the son of the president. I said, I am not going to be answering questions about persons or companies. I am dealing with the principle. I think those other things, leave them to gossip there. I want the Special Investigation Unit to be able to do justice to this question in our province. Anyone who would have done something wrong must face criminal charges. There is a question about the Chief of Staff. I don't understand this question. I am the Premier. I don't discuss stuff in the MEC's office. So you ask me a question. I don't know what is the issue with the Chief of Staff, Baldwin. Maybe you must phone me and tell me what is your issue. But I don't discuss gossip. I don't discuss stuff in there. If you say to me there is a problem that has been raised, I can deal with that problem. But I don't discuss who is a chief of staff of appointed in which office. It is not my responsibility. I must take care of the province. The MECs will look after that. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to suggest that you give us an opportunity now to take you through what is a very important update for us. Where is COVID-19 in Gauteng? What is the trajectory of the pandemic? On this note, I am going to ask Professor Bruce Melado to be the first one to present. Professor Bruce Melado is a member of the Gauteng COVID Advisory Committee, but he leads the work of the modeling team. They all work under Dr. Mary Kaonga, who's our senior official in the Department of Health, who helps us with planning. She is in charge of the whole advisory council, but the work on planning for the peak has been led by her. All of them under the guidance of the head of department, Professor Lukele. Professor Melado, please take us through this work. After that, we will just give an indication of where we are now. Thank you very much, Thabo. I hope I have answered all the questions of everybody wherever they are. Yes. But dealing with that first was important to get that out of the way so that we can the core business of the Command Council is to save more lives in Gauteng, is to ensure that we reduce the spread of COVID-19, that those who get the infection, as I say, have an opportunity to recover because we have a resilient public health system. That's the critical thing we want to be able to do. And those, unfortunately, we have more people who have lost their lives, and I convey my condolences again to the families who have lost their loved ones. So what is the trajectory of the pandemic now? What are we seeing from the modeling? Professor Bruce Melado.
Okay. Thanks, Premier, and thanks, HOD, for the opportunity to talk. From Beach University and Itemba Labs of the NRF, and we are supported by the Department of Science and Innovation. We have a strong partnership with Gauteng Province Department of Health, and GCRO, IBM, and the IEEE. So what you see right there is, and let's focus on the red points and the red graph. It basically indicates where we were back in May and how the modeling was able to describe the data. So you can see clearly the fact that the graph, the line, goes through the points indicates that the modeling was working fairly reasonably well. Now what you saw, when you see at the end of the graph, towards the end of May, is the emergence of localized small hotspots that have been driving the surge that we are all acquainted with and that drives most of the numbers that we have today. But it was very important at the time to establish what kind of model would work in order to describe the average dynamic or the average spread in the province. So that was established back then. Now, we fast forward to end of June. That's the graph that you see there. Again, let's focus on the red points and graph, and you can see there a clear divergence between, as time passes by, a divergence between the model and the actual points. That is not to say that the model was wrong. The model still works fairly well. It basically tells you what is the fraction of the pandemic that appears randomly, geographically speaking, but the difference basically speaks to the emergence of localized hotspots, which is what drives as of the end of June, about 2/3 of all the cases that we got in the province. That basically means, from the modeling standpoint and our ability to predict, that we have to add a new model on top in order to describe how hotspots evolve, how they look like, so that we can actually understand what happens now and how we can interpret the data that we have now. So I will switch to the modeling of the hotspots. So we have a new phenomenon, that is hotspots or localized hotspots. So I'm going to bypass a lot of technical detail, but essentially what happens here is that we have a new phenomenon in the province, that basically hotspots can be defined as small pandemics in a small community with a size of less than a square kilometer, where there is relatively high density of number of cases in the province. And what we have found out by means of artificial intelligence, by looking deep and performing a deep analysis of these data, is the fact that these hotspots, these localized hotspots, behave like small pandemics. And if you look at this graph here, what you essentially see, if you are to examine the total number of cases as a function of time, or what we call the cumulative distribution, you see in the beginning some small growth that is followed by a fast or exponential growth that levels and leads to basically the end of the hotspot or the end of the increase in cases. You can look at the small insert on the upper left corner. If you look in terms of daily occurrences or the daily number of cases, what you see again is small numbers, a maximum, and then a minimum. So we have determined that most of the overwhelming majority of these small hotspots in the province behave like that, and their lifetime typically lies between 1 to 4 weeks. So let me give you some examples of how these look in real life. So we are not theoretical. We give a practical demonstration of how hotspots evolve in the province. This is part of the province there. You have a bunch of hotspots, and highlighted there is the cumulative number of cases as a function of time for cluster. We call it clusters. It's really a small hotspot, number 71, where you see, as a function of time, there's a very slow growth, a fast growth, but that levels out and stops growing, leading to the end of that hotspot. That's another example here, where you again see in the insert cluster number 1201, you have a slow growth, a fast growth, but then the number of cases level off. So essentially, as if you had a star, it basically grows, it's very bright, but then it dies off. That's essentially what we have learned from the data. This is another example, a nice looking graph where you can see that the model used for each hotspot is actually behaving fairly well, and it goes to the data. You can see the data growing and then leveling off, and there's a curve that goes through it indicating that the model is working fairly well. Now, before I show where we are today, I'm going to be a little bit technical, so bear with me, please. Let's focus on the right-hand side, the graph on the right-hand side. So what we do now is we look at the hotspots, and we look at the number of cases in hotspots, and we classify them into two types. One, those hotspots that are past the maximum, past this local peak, and those that haven't reached it yet. So if we look at the blue curve, what you can see there, and that is June, is that the fraction of cases in hotspots that are past its maximum becomes the majority. That means that at that time we could make a prediction that we would see a slight deceleration of the number of cases in the province that we have today. So we have what appears to be a self-consistent understanding of the data so far. So where are we today? That has been alluded to by the Premier. Let's look at the upper graph there. What you see there is the number of total cases that are being reported daily. In yellow, you have the number of total recoveries. As it has been indicated by the Premier, we have a high level of recovery that for the past few days has been significantly higher than the number of active cases that seems to be leveling off. Now let's look at the graph at the bottom. The graph at the bottom gives you the number of daily cases, and you can see clearly there was a surge, an increase, an acceleration. There's some sort of deceleration leading to what we have today. So in light of what we have learned from the data, in light of the artificial intelligence that has been run on the data, it's very important to interpret these data correctly. Now, the first point I want to make here is that the fact that we seem to have some sort of up and down doesn't mean that we are past the peak of the pandemic. By no means, unfortunately, can we conclude that. What we see is basically how hotspots behave. We have learned how each hotspot behaves. If you sum them up, if you look at the dynamic of many hotspots, you will end up having ups and downs. So the upside, the good news here, is that we are in a situation where, through the combined action of improved adherence by the population to social measures and the proactive action of the Department of Health and other stakeholders, hotspots can be managed, and hotspots can grow and then diminish. And that's the good news. The bad news, unfortunately, as a result of the surge, what we have now is that transmission occurs everywhere in the province. Okay? Basically, in other words, the virus is everywhere. So as a result of that, the pandemic is taking its course. It's basically progressing towards a larger peak. So in that light, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Kawonga, who's leading the advisory committee, and who will give you a flavor of the recommendations in this light. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Premier, HOD, members of the media. Thanks, Prof. Melado, for that. So I think you've seen the graphs and you've heard the message from Prof. Melado about how this epidemic is going. So, I mean, as you know, Prof. Melado, you've seen him previously. Him and his team are the ones who are really helping us to understand this epidemic. And as he's mentioned, the most recent work has been trying to understand this phenomenon of hotspots. And I think based on his message, the key things that he mentioned, I think, is the fact that the key message we need to take away is that it's too soon to breathe a sigh of relief. It's too early. We're not at the peak. There's ongoing transmission of this infection in the population. So even though the hotspots that are growing rapidly are the areas where we're going to be focusing a lot of our interventions to stop them from growing, to stop them from increasing this transmission, there's still transmission happening in other areas outside the hotspots. And I'm sure you know a little bit about the COVID-19 virus that causes COVID-19. So for the virus to be transmitted, it needs a high number of people who are susceptible. So susceptibility means these are people who've never had COVID before, COVID-19. They have never had a vaccine. We do not yet have a vaccine. And the thing that will help us is to keep the people who are infected away from those who are susceptible, because there are a lot of susceptible people. Even if you look at the number of people who've had COVID-19 in our province, we're over 150,000 people. That's a minuscule amount compared to the total population. So there's still a large population out there that still has not had COVID-19. They have not had a vaccine. That means there'll be susceptible people. And so the way we try and make sure that we keep the susceptible away from the infected is by introducing what are the interventions called public health and social measures. And some people refer to them as non-pharmaceutical interventions. So they're non-pharmaceutical, meaning they're not based on drugs or vaccines. So all of it is based on our behavior, and all of it is based on how we behave when we're out there. Are we wearing our masks? Are we actually obeying social distancing rules? Because that's how we keep ourselves away. So social distancing is the first port of call. And in situations where you can't distance as well as you would like to, like you have to get into a taxi, you have to get home, wear a mask in public. So I think that's the first key message, the fact that I think we as a population have a role to play. Government can do its part, but then we also have to do our part, which is about adhering to those regulations. I think the other key recommendation that's coming out of our advisory committee is that we obviously have to intensify and enforce some of the measures that have been in place, like isolation and quarantine. So isolation and quarantine is also another way that we keep infected people away from susceptible people. So if you are infected, the Premier was just talking now about his experience of having COVID-19. He stayed at home, he isolated, he kept away from everyone else. So that's how we keep infected away from susceptible people. People need to isolate. So the government can do what it can to make sure that we isolate people, we make our facilities available. But some people are isolating at home. So when you're asked to isolate by a health worker, what we're appealing to people is ensure that you do isolate. We have heard reports of people still going out shopping, still going out with their friends, still visiting even when they have COVID-19. Because I think there's a sense sometimes that, since I don't have severe symptoms, I'm not in hospital, I'm sure I'm okay. So I think a lot of what is coming out is that we need to intensify our behavior change interventions. So our communication about this infection, about communication about how it gets spread, so that people really understand what this is about and the fact that everyone has a role to play in all of this. So behavior change interventions are absolutely essential. I've talked about isolation and quarantine, so avoiding gatherings, etc., and just ensuring that we adhere to the regulations about funerals and religious gatherings and so on. So the other thing that's really important is rapidly identifying these dangerous hotspots. So the ones that are growing rapidly, the ones that are becoming bigger and taking up bigger geographical space. And the way we identify them is continuing the engagement that Gauteng Health and the Premier's office have had with academics and scientists like Prof. Milado and other scientists that are on the advisory committee, who are continuously doing the kind of work that he's presented today, to show us that, okay, this is now what's important. So now we took away the message, okay, the dangerous hotspots are the ones that are really growing rapidly. Let's make sure that when we have our ward-based intervention, which the Department of Health has put in place, we target particular interventions to the areas where we're seeing rapidly growing hotspots at a ward-based level. And the important reason about going down to the ward-based level, which is what they're doing, is that I think if you look at, for example, Johannesburg district, 4-point-something million, 5 million people or so. If you look at the definition of a hotspot, the whole district is a hotspot because we have a certain number of more than 5 people per 100,000. However, when you start going to smaller granular level, you'll find areas at a smaller area level that are more dangerous. They have actually, they meet the definition of a hotspot very clearly, whereas others may not. And so it's finding those areas that we are continuously working with in conjunction with other partners also, like the Gauteng City Region Observatory and so on. So that's really important, and that science is continuing to help. And then the last thing I just want to say is also, once we find the hotspots, it's about responding. And I did mention just now about the ward-based strategy and trying to respond at a smaller granular level. So I just wanted to really take away the key messages and also the recommendations about what we need to do to make sure that we continue. The good news we're seeing, as Prof. Milado mentioned, is not yet very good news. The peak is still going to come. So all these interventions have to continue. And as we know, the vaccine that's being tested right now will not be available for... It's not less than 12 months, and so we have to continue with the interventions that I'm talking about now. Thank you very much.
I want to go back to the main presentation.
Yes. Yeah, there it is.
So this is the one.
That's the one. Yes.
So just to get the message from the professors presented in a different way. So I'm going to show some of the specific hotspot related story that Professor Bruce Milado is modeling and what Dr. Mary Kaunga is saying as a recommendation of the Advisory Council, what our response needs to be. My message is always that the hotspots are changing. I want this to be internalized. The hotspots are changing. Yes, there are some hotspots that are more stubborn than others. There are areas where a month ago in June were not hotspots, but as we speak now, they are hotspots. So others are emerging as hotspots. There's also work in the background. There are hotspots that are dying because when we check what exactly is happening, is the grassroots work, the work by healthcare workers on the ground, and some community mobilization where it's happening. So I want to go to a slide today that we always say to you, what is the update? The best story for today is just how the Gauteng province is doing with the recoveries. I am in that statistic of 105,614. And I think it is the whole story to explain what going through COVID-19, what the experience is like. And that's why I would like to convey a message to the people of Africa. Don't put yourself at risk to be in a situation where you will contract COVID-19. Even though we see significant, substantial recoveries, just that experience for the number of days when you go through that, it's a story I would want to tell some other day. I know you are media people. I don't want to tell it today. It is a terrible experience going through COVID-19. And thanks God I didn't have the extent, the full severe symptoms that others who have gone through them have told me. But it is possible to stay away from. In the nature of the work we do, we must always go out there. We must take extraordinary measures. We're now also working with the grassroots on hotspot strategy. But many people can, the older people in particular, must stay away. That's why they must really stay away from going up and down. And I would particularly want to say today that I am still worried like I was last month on the funerals. I am still worried that the number of people who are turning up at funerals, even after emphasis, there's still more. I must also say that yes, we were paying our last respects to our stalwart, Babu Andrew Mlangeni, but I was monitoring those numbers. I know the people of Soweto also arrived at the house the day he got home. But as I do that, I also worry. That's the thing with COVID-19 is that funerals, even if the number is smaller, funerals are the easy point of family transmission, community transmission amongst family members. So I am still worried about public gatherings, marches, and I know, as I say that, I understand our people were honoring our veteran, our stalwart Babu Mlangeni, but they turned up in numbers larger than allowed. That is a problem. But I also say like that, those who turn up, who are organizing protest actions against gender-based violence, I've seen a number of those activities in different places. Yes, they are dealing with a problem. I respect that, but that is a problem. Turning up at a march, the chances of infecting each other is a problem. I've watched that, people having a protest in this area, in that area. So when we say that even in the hotspots, sometimes the hotspots level up and they shoot up. We are always able to trace what has happened in that area. Why do we see a spike in that area? We're able to identify one specific event that caused a spike, what would be called a cluster infection. We're able to do that in each area. So we would be very happy if we can have these hotspots that are leveling up. But there's also a great deal of work. We now have 400 ward-based response teams in Gauteng. 400. There are more than 500 wards in Gauteng. We have 400 ward-based response teams. What is a ward-based response team? A ward-based response team is the health workers at a local level working with the community leaders to make people more aware that in this area we have more susceptibility. We now have infected people in your area. Know as you go to the shops in this area that we have lots of new infections in the area. You must expect, even as you go to the shop or you go to a church in an area which is now an area of huge, so this information is taken by the ward-based response teams to communities, even house to house. The ward-based response teams are also working with the police. We have said before that you can't police the people. Fighting a pandemic needs people to enlist themselves. It's about their own health. It's about they preventing infecting others. It's about taking responsibility. So the ward-based response teams are really, really helping us in a great deal in Gauteng. It's a story that has not been told, that we are now tackling COVID-19 at a grassroots level. I can tell you a story of a ward-based response teams in my area in Midrand. Even at the time I was in self-isolation, the nurses and the local team that does work in the different areas in Midrand who were looking after me, coming to every day to make sure that what they gave me yesterday has worked. They were telling me, also giving me reports about the work they are doing in Diepsloot, in Ivory Park, because those are the communities in Midrand, that the work they are doing as the ward-based response teams, and how we have been able to get Diepsloot. I want to show you the slide. Diepsloot was one of the biggest inflection points in our province with regard to the sub-districts, the hotspots that Professor Melado was talking about. So there was a period in June, myself and MEC Masuku shared with you that we were very worried about Diepsloot, but it has fallen behind in the hotspots because of, so there's work happening to contain the pandemic at a grassroots level through change of behavior, more information, work being done in the communities. So if you look at the slide that has got these hotspots, that's where Professor Bruce Melado was. So so we now know that the Soweto, Johannesburg Region D, Soweto area, the greater Soweto is now the biggest hotspot in Gauteng. Week by week, we have been sharing with you which is our hotspot, which is now the biggest hotspot. You remember there was a period we said to you the inner city of Johannesburg and Mayfair was the number one hotspot. You can see it's now number 2 in the province as a hotspot. In this area, it is in these hotspots where we are getting in these ward-based response teams to really be effective. If you have a funeral in the hotspot, you are likely to infect more people. If there is a party, at least the parties are not allowed now. But if people organize a house party against all the advice in an area where almost the infection level is very high, or the pandemic is growing in that area. So you would see Johannesburg Region D, which is Alex. There was a period where Alex, Wynberg area, that includes the infection was very low. Now it's number 3 in the province. So basically we are sharing with you, this is changing. I want to keep emphasis. The hotspot story is not the same. There are hotspots, as Professor Melado said, there are hotspots that are leveling. There are those that are shooting up. There was a period when the Mamelodi area, Soshanguve, was worrying us. We even went there to Soshanguve with MEC Masuku. And we took the whole team to do that. And Soshanguve, Mamelodi, no, not Mamelodi, Soshanguve, Mabopane, Garankuwa area. Mamelodi is in the east, Soshanguve, Mabopane is in the west. As we speak now, the numbers are shooting up in that area. And we traced it to one funeral, followed by another funeral on the 17th. On the 17th of July, there was another funeral where over 1,000 people came to the funeral. The pandemic there is certainty about it. The laws are so simple. You can be sure. If you have a gathering of people, large number of people, you can be sure that out of that gathering, the pandemic is going to reach more susceptible people. So it's very predictable. And I am, even in family funerals, which are difficult to avoid, go into your own family funeral. You just need to have in your frame of mind that somebody in the family is going to pick up the pandemic. In our public transport systems, yes, the public transport systems are a very big area of potential infections. And we know that with the economy open, a lot of our people rely on public transport in that sense. So the hotspots, you would see that the hotspots are changing. In Ekurhuleni, the area that used to be a big hotspot was what's a region in Ekurhuleni that includes Tembisa. It's no longer the number one area of high inflation. Again, is the interventions that were made in those areas. So the hotspot, but this is also too early. The general transmission is still too early. We can go back to a situation where in these hotspots, at the peak, they are hotspots again. So what is the message to the people of our province? Yes, the numbers of daily infections over the last 2 weeks, especially of July, they have been coming down. We don't want to say to the people of our province, the storm has passed. Now, you know, I broadcast the storm. I said the storm has arrived. The storm has not passed. We are still in the midst of that storm. So we need to do all the necessary precautions, and we don't need the police to be policing our behavior to help save more lives. The different areas in our province are coming up okay. Let me tell you the story that Dr. Kaunga didn't want to talk of. The closure of the sale of alcohol, the suspension of the sale of alcohol is doing good for our hospitals. This is the story we need to say. It is doing good for our hospitals. The pressure that we have had before the suspension of the sale of alcohol. So what we can say to you is that, yes, the hospitalization rate, as you'll see in our report, we still have a high hospitalization rate, but we are coping. Coming into August, we have more additional beds coming in stream in our province. Additional beds from the field hospitals, but additional beds that have been the construction work that has been happening in the various hospitals. Those additional beds by mid-August, we would have the comfort that the pressure that we are having currently, we're still surviving. We're able to have admissions, move people from this area. Sometimes people go to an area where there's no bed. The pressure is still there, and we want to still say we can do a lot as the people of our province. The suspension of the sale of alcohol has assisted, but the pressure is still there. And that pressure going into the month of August, which is a tough month, going into the peak, we should not lower the guard. We don't want to send a message out there that Gauteng, any message that Gauteng is now, has reached the peak. That message would not be accurate. Yes, the pandemic is slowing down. But we think it's just a matter of waves. We think it's one wave, there may be another wave coming, there may be another wave coming, there may be a wave that will get into the peak. So when the numbers are going down, yes, we should be saying, you know, it's a reprieve, it's a temporary reprieve. We must be saying, yes, the infection rate today is lower than yesterday. Let's continue to do those things. But we must never say, no, the pandemic is now done in Gauteng, it is going to move elsewhere. It's too early. That's the message that comes from our advisory. It's too early, there are still too many, there's still millions of people who are susceptible. But there are also a lot of people who are asymptomatic. Those who are asymptomatic are not included in our numbers. So the pandemic is still here. And that is why we must focus our energies going into the month of August, which is a critical month in our modeling, to do everything we can to save more lives. That must be our preoccupation. Our preoccupation cannot be some malfeasance about tenders. Our preoccupation must be to mobilize more for a solid community response in changing behavior, and to support our healthcare workers for the outstanding work that they are doing in this province of Gauteng. So if you have questions, Thabo, you can come back and deal with questions. I chose today just to deal with the story of the hotspots, what's happening. There's a bit of good news, but it is too early to celebrate.
Part of the briefing that has been concluded. I did see a few more questions that were sent to me by WhatsApp. We will be able to talk. I'll get back to those who send me additional questions, but we will now deal with the issues about our health response. Let's start. Yeah. Is it dead? Let's get another mic there. Okay, let's move to, is there a mic there? Do you have a question, Chriselle? Okay, that's fine. Sure.
Thank you
All
very
right.
much.
Yeah.
It's Zianda from Newsroom Africa again. I wanted to know if the Premier is at all concerned about footage that was running on Newsroom Africa of 3 generals who were smoking at the funeral service of the late Andrew Mlangeni, and whether this purported, possible breaking of the regulations concerns him at all. Thank you.
Okay.
Premier, it's Ndaizo again from Power FM. Just on the alcohol, you didn't really elaborate on it. Can you please just give details in terms of the numbers and how the hospital trauma wards are looking? In previous times, we would get more of a substantive, information regarding how the wards are looking as far as alcohol-related incidents are concerned. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Hi, Premier. It's Govan Whittles again from ENCA. You've said that the transmissions are obviously still happening outside of the hotspots, and we see today that the national government has revised the regulations and allowed people to travel for leisure to holiday accommodation within their provinces. I'm not too sure how you think this will affect your campaign to arrest the increase of infections.
Okay. All right, is that all here? I'm going to read one question from WhatsApp, and it's from Alex Mitchell from News 24. Is the slow in infection rate not attributed to the fact that mass testing is no longer taking place? I'm sure Prof would be able to deal with that. Okay, those are the questions that we have. We will now answer.
I would like them to start
Okay,
and then deal with that.
that's fine. We'll start with
If you can start.
Dr. Mary Kawonga, and then Prof. Milado, and then Prof. Kelly will speak.
I have written them down for you. I will deal with the first one about the smoking general.
Thank you very much for those questions. So the Premier will deal with the first question. Regarding the alcohol and hospital beds, I mean, I think the question is indirectly about trauma, and we know alcohol is related to trauma. And the reason why that measure was put in place was trying to reduce the demand on hospital beds due to trauma. So, I mean, there's anecdotal evidence when you talk to some clinicians in some hospitals that they're seeing a reduction in trauma cases. And so when you said she didn't want to talk about it, it's because I didn't want to bring anecdotes to a media briefing. So we will try and reach out and get data. It's a little also too early because, you know, the recommendation only came out on 13th of July. And so, you know, but you know, it's useful to monitor those trends, and I think the trends will continue to be monitored. But we didn't want to present anecdotal information at this media briefing. Regarding opening up in terms of travel to holiday accommodation and so on, I mean, I think it's a very tough balancing act. The WHO recommends when you're implementing public health and social measures, you have to look at the state of the epidemic, but then you also have to look at other aspects of life, like social and economic aspects of life. And I think what they often recommend is that there are certain things that are less risky, that you can sort of open up, you know, slowly and one at a time. And, you know, so allowing people to travel, we'll see what impact that has. And, you know, you can't close things and keep them closed forever. And so I think this is just one of the ways of trying to open up the things that they see are going to be less risky in terms of that. I mean, it's always a worry, yes, when we open up more. Because the whole principle I was talking about earlier of keeping infected people away from susceptible people is going to be there. But we're hoping that, well, the people who sort of opened it up, the National Command Council, I'm sure, would want to monitor and see that what happens with that. But yeah, it is always a concern, but you can't keep things locked up forever. There was another question, I think, which I may have missed. Oh, about the testing. So, I mean, I don't think testing is the most important factor here. It isn't. I mean, testing doesn't have an impact on the kinds of phenomenon that Prof. Milado was talking about. So we don't think that that is a contributor, the reduced testing, mass testing. Mass testing is actually not very helpful because you cast the net quite wide and you don't always pick up the people who are positive. So, yeah, thank you.
The professor responsible for health in Gauteng sometimes is hidden by the finance MSc. You might actually have a lot more to say.
Thank you very much, Premier, and let me take out the mask. And thank you very much, colleagues. I wanted to address
I do want to reveal that Prof has also recovered. He was COVID positive more or less around the same time with me, but he came back, he got COVID positive before, and he came back before me. He was COVID positive as well.
Thank you very much, Premier. That's to testify that COVID can affect all of us. I came back earlier after the minister pronounced the de-isolation from 14 days to 10 days. Touch wood as well, I didn't get the severe component of it, but the psychological impact, the moving away, I moved away from the main house to the outside rooms and had to cook for myself, and the trauma to my grandchildren was more of a problem. But I wanted to address the question of testing. Actually, in terms of testing, as a province, we continue to be the leader in the testing. And actually working together with the NHI, when we started, the amount of testing which we're doing was about 3,000 a day. We increased it up to 5,000. We continue to do the testing. We just refocused the testing mainly to hospitals and to healthcare workers. That is why we picked up quite a number of healthcare workers who have turned positive. And also on the hotspots, just to indicate that indeed the testing we are continuing, and as my colleague Dr. Krongo has indicated, while the testing is an important factor, it is not the determining factor, but we are testing. Thank you, Premier.
Okay, I just want, let's show that slide that has got testing. Where are we? Okay, there. So, just to be consistent with what you can see that in our province, there's no significant slowdown of testing. In fact, we have consistently had been 33% of all the tests done nationally were done in Gauteng. The ratio is increasing. You can see we are at 34% now. So of all the national tests that are done on a day-to-day basis, the largest number of that, at least 1/3 of those are coming out of our province consistently. That's a consistent story. So what the professors were saying, what Dr. Mary Kaunga was saying, and what Professor Lukele is saying is true. What is the difference is where the testing is happening right now. And we got that advice from the national government, the National Department of Health, that we need to focus on the hotspots and the institutions, our healthcare workers, and the vulnerable groups, including the homes for the elderly. As you know, that the transmission at the homes of the elderly, the vulnerable groups, like also people with mental health illness, the transmission in those can really cause major problems. So not necessarily that we're testing less, but it is where is the test and what is your target. So that's an important story about testing. One of the things that have worried us, observed, there's an analysis, as we were analyzing who is getting COVID-19 in Gauteng. So this was done by the Gauteng City Region Observatory. There are two important observations to make. It's a slide that's not in here. The first, we found that in June, when the surge was happening, more women were getting COVID-19 in Gauteng. Particularly during June, large numbers of women, new infections were actually happening amongst women. We're asking ourselves with our data analytics team and all the teams that are tracking we found that the substantial explanation would also be that the exposure that women have. When the economy reopened more, the significant number of women also work in places, in circumstances. These are not formal jobs. Many of them in the informal sector where it's very difficult to have proper, unlike in companies where they would actually have social distancing measures. If you go through the CBD of Johannesburg or the CBD of Tshwane, in the CBDs, and just look at those areas where they are the informal sector, the largest number of people there, it's women. The second dimension of the demographic trend was that, yes, we were getting more younger people getting infections as well. And as you know, the story of infections amongst the youth, you've got to understand where are they getting these infections. These problems around parties, around these places where and even on death, there was a period where we were now, there's still more men who are passing on, but we were beginning to see that a trend is emerging. Younger people of a particular age are also featuring. So the fact that you are young, you may have a stronger immune system, does not make you immune from actually not just contracting COVID, but also passing on about the disease. So our message, the first point I make is observation relating to the vulnerability, the risk and exposure of women, and that's something that a social system exposes many more women. They are the ones also who are doing care. In many instances, they are the ones who are interacting with those who are infected. Even in households and in the nature of the jobs they do. But also young people, say a message to young people is that they mustn't think that they are invincible. In other words, I'm young, I'm strong, I can get COVID, but I'll be okay soon. We must send a strong message to the youth, particularly with these things of parties, house parties that are organized. The worst thing with young people is that they also infect the older people in the households. And that's where the issue of schooling for us. The key thing about schooling is a lot more about the potential that the children will bring COVID-19 at the peak, will bring it home rather than because they have stronger immune systems. Science tells us that the younger they are, the stronger their immune system will be to be able to. But the worry is that they live in homes. So every day they leave home to school, the impact, the potential for bringing it would be there, without worrying only about the issue of whether they are going to school or not. Smoking generals. Well, let me first say that I think the regulations talk about what has been stopped is the sale. The sale of tobacco. I'm not aware that in South Africa smoking is banned. In other words, if you have some stuff you got yourself and stocked before stash, and I know some even buy that from the illegal market. But it is not smoking that is banned. It is the sale of tobacco. So I don't want to comment about whether it is kosher for the generals to smoke on an occasion like that. I don't want to comment on that. I think if you ask the healthcare workers, they'll just tell you, the healthcare workers will tell you straight that it is risky to smoke. Whether you are a general or not, you are not invincible. It is risky to smoke. The issue is not whether they broke the law or not. I think the healthcare workers will always say that to us, that smoking exposes you to the risk that your system will be undermined. The capacity to fight the virus will be undermined. We will ask next week, the team from the clinicians, will ask them next week to come and give us feedback on the trauma units. You know, we had the professor here, Moeng, who was here last time, so we will organize that next week. He joins us when we do the briefing. As Dr. Kaunga said, it might still be too early, and it's still anecdotal, but they will come with a full sense of the trauma units across the province. But anecdotes are useful. They are not quite a science. they're just useful. They give you a sense of the direction things are moving. Science requires that you must be more rigorous, more robust, check and compare properly. But we think that that suspension from the pressure that the system was really getting has helped us. I agree with you, Dr. Kaonga, that the holiday accommodation issue is really the issue. All the sectors are under tremendous pressure. This issue of balancing, opening the economy and containing the pandemic can be a very difficult thing. But in our province, when there are these places that are open, we just want to make sure that they comply. They are not going to be points of transmission, and that people are not going to gather there in large numbers at some place, some holiday accommodation, and suddenly we have what we're saying we must avoid in communities. You have a big party in that area. Parties are dangerous. There are areas of high risk, like marches, like funerals. Unfortunately, we can't avoid funerals. But I want to say to you, when you go to every funeral, family or not, just make sure after you have come back from the funeral, you test. That is my attitude as well. That when family gathers at the funeral, you are going to have somebody. The chance will be there that somebody will be COVID, and then somebody is going to infect. So it is always advisable to take those measures that advise. We know that it's not in the rural areas, it's not always easy for people to have access to testing. But that's my attitude for now. Even this place where we are now is too big. So I'm going to listen to my system after leaving here. If I feel I have some symptom, Prof, I'll call you. I must wait for 5 days, Prof. Dr. Kaunga, I will wait. But even what I now do when I have been out, when I get home, I spend a few days in self-isolation. This I'm declaring to you. My family knows today he was out there. He's a danger. It's not a stigma, but it is just making sure that you say, if my child goes to school, I know my child was at school, coming back, the virus travels through people. So when we say we must live with the virus, having come here today, you living here, I don't know where else you were, just take it, you might have picked up the virus. It's not to scare you, but it is to help you deal with this. So you're able to know, you listen to your body, you pick up any symptoms that are there, and then you seek help as quickly as possible. If there's something today I think I did share with you is what it means to be a survivor, a COVID survivor. Thank you so much. This is not newsworthy, I know. But it's just to help you as human beings. Thank you. We are done, Thabo. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much. We've come to the end of the briefing. Those questions that I said I'll deal with, the ones we received via WhatsApp, additional ones, I will get back to you. But thanks a lot. We'll meet again next time, next week.
After that, I can't see so much.